The makeshift dragon pit was alive with the low rumble of massive beasts shifting restlessly in their pens. The air was thick with heat, the faint smell of sulfur mingling with the earthy scent of damp stone. Jon Snow sat on a low stone bench near the edge of the pit, gazing at the faint glow of the dragon's massive forms silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. Across from him sat an old Valyrian dragon caretaker, his leathery hands resting on the pommel of his cane. His silver hair, a mark of his heritage, glinted faintly in the light as he observed Jon with a calm, knowing expression. At Jon's side lay the red armor Varos had given him, its design intricate and intimidating, with the sigil of the three-headed dragon of Valyria engraved on the chest. Jon turned the armor over in his hands, his brow furrowed. "This was a gift from Varos," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of doubt. "He says I'm something more than I thought I was. But I don't feel any different. I'm still just me." The old Valyrian smiled faintly, leaning forward. "And yet you sit here, in the company of dragons, donning the armor of your ancestors. Just you, Jon Snow, does not explain how you came to ride Scourge, a dragon that no one has ever dared approach." Jon frowned, his gaze shifting to the massive figure of Scourge, who lay curled in the farthest pen. The dragon's black and red scales shimmered faintly in the torchlight, and his glowing red eyes seemed to pierce the darkness. "I didn't choose him," Jon said after a moment. "He chose me. I don't know why." The Valyrian chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the vast space. "That is the way of dragons. They choose their riders, not the other way around. And only those of Valyrian blood can form such a bond. It is in our blood, Jon. The fire, the strength. It calls to them." Jon shook his head, his voice tinged with frustration. "I didn't even know I had this blood until today. My whole life I've been a Stark. I've served in the Night's Watch. Now, they tell me I'm something else entirely." The caretaker's gaze softened, and he leaned back slightly. "Perhaps your blood is Stark, but your soul is Valyrian. The dragons see it. And Scourge," he gestured toward the immense beast. "Scourge is not like the others. He is larger than even Balerion the Dread, the mightiest dragon of old Valyria." Jon's eyes widened slightly. "Larger than Balerion? That's impossible." The old man nodded solemnly. "Not impossible, Jon. Scourge was bred for war, for conquest, for the rebirth of Valyria. His size, his strength, his fire, it is unmatched. And yet he chose you. That is no small thing. It means there is incredible power in your blood, even if you cannot see it." Jon leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice quieter now. "But why? Why me? I've never wanted any of this. I fought to protect the North, to save the living. That's all I've ever cared about." The Valyrian smiled again, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression. "Sometimes the flames choose not the one who desires power, but the one who fears it. You do not seek the dragons, Jon Snow, but they seek you. They see what lies within you. Strength, resolve, and perhaps destiny." Jon fell silent, his gaze fixed on the faint glow of Scourge's eyes. The weight of the caretaker's words settled over him like a heavy cloak. He wasn't sure if he believed in destiny, or if he even wanted to. But the bond he felt with Scourge, however inexplicable, was undeniable. The old Valyrian rose slowly, using his cane for support, and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Wear the armor, Jon. Ride the dragon. The flames have chosen you for a reason, and in time you will understand. But for now, know this, you are no ordinary man. You are a bridge between the past and the future, between fire and ice." Jon looked up at the caretaker, his expression a mixture of doubt and determination. Slowly, he nodded, his hand tightening around the edge of the red armor. As the old Valyrian walked away, the low rumble of Scourge's breath filled the chamber, a sound that was both menacing and strangely reassuring. Jon stood, his resolve hardening. If this was what the world demanded of him, he would face it. One step, one battle, and one dragon at a time. As the old Valyrian caretaker turned to leave, Jon Snow called out, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Wait," he said, rising to his feet, the weight of the conversation still pressing on him. "You speak of destiny and the flames of the Lord of Light. Tell me, what is the truth of this God? Where does your faith come from? What are its origins?" The old man paused, his cane tapping softly against the stone floor as he turned back to Jon. His fiery eyes, dimmed by age but still holding the flicker of ancient knowledge, regarded Jon thoughtfully. He gestured for Jon to sit again, and he himself settled on a nearby stone bench. "The Lord of Light," the caretaker began, his voice low and steady, "is not merely a god of fire as some believe. He is the embodiment of life and creation, of the flame that gives warmth in the cold and light in the dark. His faith, like the fire itself, is older than memory, older even than the doom of Valyria." Jon leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But where does it come from? The stories, the rituals, the priests. How did it all begin?" The caretaker's gaze grew distant, as though he were peering back through time itself. "The origins of the faith of R'hllor, the Lord of Light, are shrouded in the mists of history. It is said to have arisen in the Shadowlands, far to the east, beyond Ashai. In those lands, where the sun rarely shines and the darkness is eternal, there were ancient practitioners who first learned to harness the fire within. They claimed to see visions in the flames, glimpses of the future, whispers of the divine." Jon's eyes narrowed. "Visions? Like the ones Varos claims to see?" The caretaker nodded slowly. "Yes, the flames speak to those who are chosen. The priests of the Lord of Light believe that R'hllor grants his followers the power to see, to heal, to command fire itself. But such gifts come with a cost. To channel the Lord's will is to walk a fine line between light and shadow." Jon's expression darkened. "Shadow? You mean, like the darkness Varos warned about?" The caretaker's voice grew quieter, almost reverent. "The Lord of Light's eternal enemy is the Great Other, the embodiment of darkness, death, and chaos. Where the Lord of Light brings life and warmth, the Great Other seeks to extinguish it. This war between light and shadow, between fire and ice, has raged since time immemorial. Some say the long night, when the White Walkers first rose, was but one battle in this endless struggle." Jon sat back, his mind racing. "And the dragons? Do they come from the Lord of Light?" The caretaker's faint smile returned. "Dragons are creatures of fire, Jon Snow. They were born in the fires of Valyria, long before the Targaryens claimed them. Some say they are the Lord of Light's greatest creation, a gift to mankind to fight the darkness. Others believe they are wild, untamable forces, bound only by the blood of Valyria." Jon's voice grew quieter, almost hesitant. "And what about me? You said Scourge chose me because of my blood. But what does that mean for this war between light and shadow?" The caretaker's eyes gleamed, his tone growing grave. "It means you have a part to play, Jon Snow, a role in the battle that is yet to come. The Lord of Light does not choose his champions lightly, and the bond you share with Scourge is no coincidence. You are a bridge, not just between fire and ice, but between the living and the divine." Jon fell silent, his thoughts a storm of doubt and uncertainty. The weight of what the caretaker said seemed almost too great to bear. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but resolute. "I don't know if I believe in gods or prophecies. I don't know if I can trust what Varos sees in the flames. But if there's a chance to save the people I love, to protect the realm from whatever comes next, then I'll do what I have to." The caretaker nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Belief is not required, Jon Snow. Action is. And when the time comes, the flames will guide you." With that, the old Valyrian rose and made his way toward the exit, leaving Jon alone in the glow of the dragon pit. As the faint rumble of Scourge's breath filled the air, Jon stared into the flickering torchlight, his thoughts heavy with questions that had no easy answers. As Jon Snow sat in quiet contemplation, the heat of the dragon pit radiating around him, the sound of boots on stone echoed softly in the chamber. Oberin Martell, ever the wanderer and opportunist, stepped into the space, his presence as confident and commanding as ever. The torchlight danced across his sharp features, and his faint smile suggested he had been observing for some time before making his entrance. "Forever brooding, Jon Snow," Oberin remarked, his tone carrying a mixture of amusement and genuine curiosity. He glanced at the departing Valyrian caretaker, then turned his attention back to Jon. "You Stark types never learn to take the heat, do you? Always wrestling with your thoughts, while the world burns around you." Jon's gaze shifted to Oberin, his expression tinged with exasperation. "Do you have something to say? Or are you just here to jest?" Oberin's smirk grew as he approached, his eyes briefly flickering to Scourge, the massive dragon lying in the far pen. The creature's red and black scales shimmered ominously, and its glowing eyes seemed to observe Oberin with vague disinterest. "I never jest without purpose, Jon Snow. But yes, I do have something to say. Something important." Jon sighed, sitting up straighter. "Then say it." Oberin's demeanor shifted, his tone becoming more serious as he sat beside Jon on the bench. "This moment we're in," he began, gesturing around them. "This is the only chance the world will ever have of a real, lasting peace. You know it as well as I do. Westeros will never stop fighting. The great houses, Baratheons, Starks, Lannisters, Tyrells, they'll keep tearing each other apart for scraps of power." Jon frowned, his expression growing thoughtful. "And you think peace is even possible? With all that's happened, with all the blood spilled?" Oberin nodded, his voice firm. "It's not only possible, it's necessary. And the only way to achieve it is to unite the world under something greater than the ambitions of lords and ladies." He leaned closer, his voice lowering slightly, as though sharing a secret. "Figures like Varos transcend this. He isn't just a warrior or a kingmaker. He's something far more dangerous and far more important. He sees the world for what it truly is, and he's willing to burn away the rot to forge something better. Just like Aegon the Conqueror did hundreds of years ago." Jon's brow furrowed. "Aegon united the Seven Kingdoms through conquest. He brought fire and blood to Westeros. Is that what you think Varos will do?" Oberin shrugged lightly. "Conquest is never pretty, Jon, but it is effective. Aegon brought order to chaos. He created a world where the great houses were forced to coexist under a single banner. And for hundreds of years, Westeros was stronger for it. What Varos envisions goes beyond even that. He doesn't just want to unite a kingdom. He wants to unite the world." Jon's voice grew quieter, skeptical. "And you're willing to follow him? To put your trust in a man who speaks of destiny and fire, who manipulates the world to fit his vision?" Oberin smiled faintly, his gaze shifting to Scourge. "I trust in what I've seen. I've seen dragons rise again. I've seen the White Walkers defeated, their endless night stopped in its tracks. And I've seen men like you, men of honor, bond with creatures of myth and legend. That's not manipulation, Jon. That's history in the making." He placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, his tone softening. "The world we've known, this endless cycle of war, rebellion, and betrayal, it will never end on its own. But with figures like Daenerys, Varos, and yes, even you, there's a chance to break the wheel, to forge something new." Jon's gaze remained fixed on the ground for a moment before he looked up, meeting Oberin's eyes. "And what if he's wrong? What if all of this, all the fire and blood, leads to nothing but more destruction?" Oberin's smile faded slightly, his expression growing more solemn. "Then we'll pick up the pieces, as we always have. But if we don't try, Jon, then we've already lost. Men like Varos don't just change the world, they force it to move forward. That is the price of progress." Jon sat back, his thoughts heavy. The enormity of the moment, of the decisions he faced, weighed on him like a storm cloud. Oberin, sensing the need for space, rose to his feet and turned to leave. As he walked away, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "Think about it, Jon Snow. The world doesn't need another Stark, or even another Targaryen. It needs someone who can bridge both. Someone who can ride the storm and survive the fire." With that, He disappeared into the shadows of the dragon pit, leaving Jon alone once more. The rumble of Scourge's breath filled the silence, a reminder of the power and responsibility that now rested on Jon's shoulders. For better or worse, he was no longer just Jon Snow. He was something more, and the world was waiting to see what he would become.